Hello and welcome to Krakin Krakoa number 22. This is X-Force number 2 review. The heart of the X-Men is found here in this book. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. If you like the channel here on YouTube, if you like the Comic Book Herald's Best Comics Ever podcast, please consider liking and subscribing. And as always, please consider going on over to comicbookherald.com for all of my writing and guides and resources, helping those who are new to comics, lapsed comics readers, or just want to get into something new, help you enjoy the comic book. So today, I'm going to be talking in detail about X-Force number 2. Spoilers for this issue and the previous will follow. Without further ado, let's get into Krakin Krakoa number 22. This is an X-Force number 2 review. X-Force came out of the gates 0 to 100 real quick, and there's definitely a part of me that felt it was too quick. Issue number 2 follows through with tremendous confidence, though, to the point that X-Force is establishing itself as the main X-Men book, at least in the traditional sense comic readers have come to expect. This issue is by Benjamin Percy, Joshua Cassara, Dean White, Joe Caramagna, and Tom Miller. Today I'll answer how X-Force is becoming the most traditional core X-Men title, how X-Force is bringing back one of my favorite character relationships in X-Men comics this decade, and the history of the villainous Reavers explored. So, how is X-Force becoming the most traditional core X-Men title? Well, Ben Percy and company do a great job in X-Force number 2 answering the biggest questions that stuck out after their breakneck first issue. The comic opens with Magneto mourning the loss of Professor X before all of Krakoa, before turning to Jean Grey, who is tasked with bringing the Professor back. We get confirmation here that while there is a particular plan for bringing Professor X back via Krakoa's resurrection protocols, Jean isn't 100% confident it will even work. It was planning for an eventuality, one that feels more and more like Professor X was trying to make it happen, but there's still some doubt in the minds of the mutant nation that the man so essential to resurrection protocols can himself be brought back. This is also where we get the dual challenge of reviving Cerebro, blown to pieces in X-Force number 1, and for the first time in the Dawn of X, we visit one of multiple Cradle's backups throughout Krakoa. All these pieces are contributing to absolute meat and potatoes X-Men comics, and I love it. It's not the only revelation from House of X and Powers of 10, but it's interesting to me to see the resurrection protocols, Professor X and Cerebro, all managed outside the realm of Jonathan Hickman X-Men books. In many ways, this is exactly what I was hoping Dawn of X would do, allowing additional creators and voices to develop the new status quo for the world of mutants. The big question was how significantly will the non-Hickman books be allowed to explore this world? And in the case of X-Force, the answer is, or at least seems to be, very significantly. We also get confirmation on details surrounding the attackers, much of which was predicted or observed by Comic Book Herald readers and viewers, commenting here on the YouTube channel in particular, identifying them as the Reavers, wearing Domino's skin, actually, in order to bypass Krakoa's security features. It's pretty gross. Likewise, it's confirmed that a tracking device was placed in Professor X during his celebratory visit to Sokovia. I'm not 100% clear that Sokovia was in on the deal, so much as that the Reavers infiltrated the cooking staff in order to bug the professor. These details all add up to either an instance of tremendously blind arrogance for Charles Xavier, it would not be the first of its kind, or some intentional setup in order to draw the Reavers out. After all, Professor X sent Domino in on this mission and walked right into Sokovia drinking their wine. It just feels odd to me that the master planner of House of X, behind Moira, and the world's foremost telepath could be so well and truly bamboozled. The most welcome new player for me in this issue is Quentin Quire, shown in this issue restoring one of my favorite mutant frenemy ships, Quentin and Wolverine. More on that in a second, but they are both. Wolverine goes on a hunt, of course, to figure out, how did the Reavers achieve this, because it's not just Professor X who was killed here. I believe they say there's something like 30 to 40 mutants who were killed. I mean, it's a massacre that the Reavers are inflicting on the newly established Krakoan nation, and while Wolverine is investigating, he of course finds the snotty, arrogant Quentin Quire a few steps ahead of him. So let's run it back for a second for those of you who might not know as much. Quentin's one of my favorite Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely additions to the X-Men universe, a chaotic, goodish punk psionic with varying ties to the Phoenix Force. Quentin's been a particular thorn in Wolverine's side since the Jason Aaron and Chris Bachalo early days of Wolverine and the X-Men. One of my absolute favorite issues from the era is, I think it's number 5, might be number 4, when Wolverine takes Quentin into space to help him gamble and bring back a hull for the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. Quentin is always needling Logan. Logan gives him a fair amount of guff in return, but it's a really interesting relationship, and I think it's compounded, the interest I have in it, because despite the outward enmity and warranted lack of trust, it's worth noting that Wolverine is very much responsible for Quire's multiple chances at redemption, freeing him from imprisonment and using his Avengers clout to tell Captain America he'd be taking responsibility for the boy. This was after Quentin had gone rogue, to a degree, and had been, a pretty damaging, criminal level mutant. Wolverine says he just needs a second chance, and that's what he was working to do in Wolverine and the X-Men. This decade, we've seen Quentin runs into problems more often than not. He has extreme ability, but he runs into problems when he gets just kind of bored. But he's had some really good books of late that he's been in as a character. Generation X, lead among them, written by Christina Strain, as well as the Kelly Thompson written West Coast Avengers. Most recently, that's where Quire's been, acting more or less heroically, palling around with the West Coast Avengers, and even finding some sort of romantic partnership with Gwenpool and her shark, Jeff the Shark. To me, he's a really interesting character to see folded back into Krakoa. As Quire identifies, Krakoa's stance on mutant sovereignty is actually very much aligned with the riotous gospel he's been preaching since New X-Men's riot at Xavier's. I suspect Krakoa will suit Quire very, very well. Speaking of history lessons, the history of the villainous Reavers, the most consistent traits of the Reavers throughout history are 1, obviously hating and killing mutants, and 2, a significant, perhaps nearly exclusive amount of cyborg membership in their ranks, most famously Donald Pierce, Lady Deathstrike, and that guy who rides around with tank treads. 3, extreme anti-Wolverine vendetta, generally because he diced them up at one point in their various pasts. I would say that generally the Reavers are one of the more intimidating of the mutant hate groups. This isn't really a comment on their comparative-based nature. They all mostly suck, so much as their efficacy. They have killed and will kill again, and are as much a threat to mutant kind as William Stryker's Purophiles or Sentinels, as was captured in, their major mutant crimes totals that we saw way back, and I believe it was House of X number 4, if I'm not mistaken, the issue, of course, that laid out the case for Wanda, the Great Pretender Maximoff, and her crimes, as well as Bolivar Trask's with the Sentinels. Of course, in their horrific treatment of Domino, we see the Reavers at their absolute worst. So this is a new branch of Reavers. They are crafting cyborg ex-assassins, is what Wolverine and Quire more or less uncover here in their mission. And, again, they are plotting here at a level that I think should not go overlooked for how successful they actually are. I mean, their plan, again, kind of gross here, to use Domino's literal flesh in order to trick Krakoan sensors, gets them onto the island. They track Professor X, so they have the location, and again, they inflict a massacre on Krakoa. This is a very, very serious issue and an act of terror that mutant kind needs to deal with. Just because they have established this new nation doesn't mean that Krakoa is free from the influence and hatred of groups like the Reavers. I'm actually really into this issue, X-Force number 2, and the pace it's moving Krakoa forward. Things felt fast in issue number 1, but actually with 2 issues of all Dawn of X in the book, I'm actually more appreciating the breakneck pace. This issue won me over to the point that I'm even more excited for Benjamin Percy writing on Wolverine, which is a book that's solicited to kick off in February 2019, and I'll be covering a precap sort of here on Krakin Krakoa in the days to come. But again, for the meantime, X-Force is the book that, this is the heart of the X-Men book. This is, if you're thinking about what a traditional X-Men lineup would look like and what a traditional X-Men book would be, this is the one that's dealing with Professor X, it's dealing with Magneto, it's pulling in Jean Grey, right? It's pulling in all sorts of familiar faces. You got Wolverine on a hunt, and it's also dealing with, big issues resurrecting Professor X, resurrecting Cerebro, right? These are big issues at the center of Krakoa. An attack on all of mutant kind. This is a big issue for all of mutant kind, right? And the Krakoan nation. Whereas Hickman's X-Men, the book that is, of course, written here by the master planner, the individual who so much excitement is about, and is a big reason why Dawn of X is such a big deal. X-Men actually feels very sort of standalone, right? There are interesting developments, and I've reviewed them, and I'm pretty positive about the first couple issues, but they're kind of standalone, and they're following sort of a Summers angle that is developing some new things. But X-Force feels more traditionally like an X-Men core book that we would have seen in the past. So your mileage may vary comparing the two, but I would say for the time being, I'm really interested in the developments that are happening in this book. It's proven itself to be an essential part of the Dawn of X lineup, and I think it's doing a pretty good job with it. So I'm looking forward to X-Force number 3. I'm curious what you all think. Leave some comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me about your theories for X-Force moving forward. What are the Reavers actually planning here beyond this? Was that as far as their plan went? Probably not. It rarely is. I'm curious what their next steps will be. And I'm curious how, again, like we've made it through 2 issues now of everything. In Dawn of X, Professor X is still off the table. So I think, I talked about in issue number 1, there's very little chance to me that a death of is going to be, that's not the story. The story is, how is he resurrected? How is Cerebro brought back? What does it mean for Krakoa? And then what does it mean, frankly, for their overall security and planning? Because clearly, like, Krakoa has just been established, and already, mutant kind is dealing with the same exact kind of problems and hatred and killing that they were dealing with when they were housed on Grey Malkin Lane over on the X Mansion. So something's got to change there, and I expect we'll see how in the pages of X-Force moving forward. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Again, if you like the channel, if you like the content, please consider liking and subscribing. And go on over to comicbookherald.com, where I've got all sorts of reading orders and guides and articles and analysis that I'm pretty proud of and putting out daily. So go over to comicbookherald.com for all your comic book needs. In the meantime, thanks, everybody, for listening. And as always, enjoy the comics.